Good morning, everybody. I'm Bill Welpret. I'm a senior security consultant with Caliber Security Partners, and I'd like to share with you how I recently used the Security Process Management Suite, in particular the Compliance Communicator module and also the Risk Communicator module, to work on a HIPAA/HITECH Breach Act risk assessment. And this was done, about 3 months ago for in the Seattle area, a healthcare provider. So basically, I'll show you a little bit about how we started with this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at Compliance Communicator and show you how I got started on this. Okay, in Compliance Communicator, we use different templates, basically, and we put them up. So basically, and I'll show you quickly what the template looks like here. So while I have it in here as this demo for HIPAA and HITECH, and this is the one I'll use today, this started off with basically a Excel spreadsheet that essentially has the HIPAA controls in it and also the HITECH controls. So each one of these, it's essentially a comma separated value spreadsheet, and essentially this format's put together, and it's pretty straightforward. Here's the piece here where it just shows exactly what that section says and whether or not it's required or if it's addressable. And remember, with HIPAA, if the section is going to be required, that's something you absolutely have to do, and if it's addressable, it's something that you either have to have a way to do it right now or figure out why you can't do it and what you'd be able to do. So it's sort of a compensating control approach. So basically, this kind of template right here showing each of the sections, going down here through administrative, physical, and then technical, a policy section, and then the pieces of the HITECH Act for breach notification. So from this is in Compliance Communicator right here, and this is the demo. So what I do is I select it, and then I just pick Open. And then from here, I can go to the Survey tab. So in here, you can see that I've got these different controls, and if I click the little plus, it will expand them. And basically for each one of these sections in here, so going through this, so basically what I would do is I would take the information, and here it will show, this is what the first one is, section 164.308A, this stuff, risk analysis, and it's required. So here I've got control responses, and what I'll do is, and this is, when I'm on site, I'm talking to people, and it's always inspection, observation, and inquiry. And what you do when you're doing compliance auditing, where you're looking at evidence, you're interviewing people, you're just taking a look at the way things are, and you basically take all of your notes and all the evidence that you've collected as you go through it, and you basically input it into Compliance Communicator. So here I'll look at this and I'll say, okay, this is what the section is, and based on the information I have, then essentially I'm going to say, okay, in this case, this is something that was planned. So it could be in place. It could be not applicable. You could have compensating controls for it. And as you mouse over these, you'll notice that it gives you some information about exactly what's expected right there. Also, anytime you want to click on the little question mark sign, you'll go to the Help window. This comes up, and it's SPM, as we call it, or Security Process Management Suite, has just an excellent online help system. So anytime you're working on this, you can just drill down, and if you're not sure exactly how the tool works, you can basically go in and get some assistance on that, and it will tell you, here's what you do, basically, as you're going through this. And so it's for all the different modules. Here, again, we're working in Compliance Communicator first. So what I did was I'd take time and I'd put in notes, and one thing I want to point out, too, is well, what I've done in here for this demo is I've started populating it with some information based on that actual risk assessment, taking out the name of the actual client. So it's not complete, but for the sake of illustration, it will give you a good idea of exactly what you can do with the tool. So here, for instance, I know that they have a policy that specified risk management of information security, and that they've done a bunch of work, basically, and so the control's in place at the entity level, but there are other things that need to be done. So the control is technically not in place in an absolute sense, but it's planned, and there are intentions to move forward on this. So if If I wanted to attach a file, a piece of evidence, I could just click the attach button and then just basically browse to a file, or files plural, so that I can essentially associate evidence with the control question. So each of these, I've gone through them. That one's planned. You can see again, and what I'll do is I'll take it and I'll list the applications that were reviewed. And usually I have much more information in here. So what I'll have to do myself is at some point keep refining the demo and putting in more information so you could see. But you get a sense. You basically say, these are the applications I looked at, and these are my notes. This is why the control is in place, or why it's planned, or if it fails. And oftentimes we'll figure out, too, that a control is, they're partially compliant. It's like they're 80% of the way there, but they're not all the way. So it's a fail in a technical sense, absolutely, but they may be, you want to give them a little bit of credit, basically. So what I'll often do is I'll put in some notes, and I'll say something up at the very top of this, and I'll say, partial compliance. And this way I can basically keep notes for myself that what I'm going to work on when it's in the report, and I may want to call that out specifically, because I always believe that, if you're most of the way there, or you're making good effort on it, that should be called out in a report rather than just saying, ding, it's a finding, you're not 100% perfect. So I like to basically use the notes field. And all of this stuff, it ends up in the report, but basically that's where you have the opportunity to keep wordsmithing it and to make it say it the right way. Here's one here where we have I decided this was a fail. So while it's required, for instance, in these two policies and referenced, and there's a bunch of other information in it, essentially there, for each of the different controls or applications, I'll put comments in basically about why it's not in place, or essentially what the control weakness is, what the gap is. Excuse me. What our intention is here is to essentially note what the status today is. If I'm doing this today, I'm basically taking it, I'm looking at it and thinking, this is a snapshot. This is exactly what's happening right now and where they think they're going. And so essentially, if I'm looking at it, whether it's an assessment or an absolute audit, whether it's truly a finding, I want to capture all that information in here. So essentially, what I did is I took the time to go through each one of these, and let me close this down a sec. So for each one of these things, counting the HITECH Act, there are approximately 65 controls. So you take your time and you go through that, and when you have all this stuff in here, basically, and you've gone through and filled out everything for each one of these, all the way on down, then basically you can start generating a report. So from here, I can look at this and I can see this response summary chart. It gives me a sense of exactly what the answers were in the response count. And what I can do is I can filter this if I want to. I can say, okay, so right now what my interest is the gap analysis. It's all well and good that they've got things that are in place or things that are not applicable, compensated, or planned. But what I want to know are which ones are the fails, because those are the ones I'm going to focus on in the risk communicator module. So here, if I deselect these different ones here, I will get to only the fails, basically. And from here, what I can do is I can download this, essentially, and export it, or basically export it to an Excel spreadsheet or download it as a Word document. So if I export this, for instance, it comes in as a comma-separated value sheet. And then essentially it's just going to show me which ones exactly are the fails, and it gives me my information that's in here. So if I look at that and say a word or wrap text on it, I'll be able to see exactly what it is. So from here, what I do is I take the information. There's a way we've added into Security Process Manager a way to import it directly into Risk Communicator. When I did this, that function wasn't yet capable. So what I would do is I'd take the information and I'd basically manually enter it back into Risk Communicator, which didn't really take that long. It's just copy and paste for the most part. So that's what that sheet looks like. So let me go back over here. So I've taken this, I've filtered it for the fails, and I've gone ahead and exported it to an Excel spreadsheet. So from this point, I go back over here to just click on Process Management Home. What I want to do is I'm moving over to Risk Communicator. So at this stage, you can see we've got a bunch of other ones in here that are demos, just other things that are going on, and I can basically not have the templates show if I want, and just basically just show only the ones that I'm looking for. So your view would be basically just what you're working on at any time. You wouldn't necessarily see all this. So here is the HIPAA HITECH temp one, and so I'll show you what I did right with this. If you open this up. So it shows that I'm the one who's got it in use. And while I have it, it's open and it's locked for me for editing, but other users have read access only, so other people can get in and look at things and whatnot, but I'm the only one currently who can edit it. So from this, what I started off with, and you're going to see that essentially the completed view, basically, but when you start off, everything's going to be basically be blank in here. And there's the import function that I was talking about a couple of minutes ago. What I did before this was available was I'd just click on New, and I'd sit there and look at this and say, okay, here's a new risk from one of those gaps. So you describe what it is, and you say, okay, what's it going to be? What kind of category does it most fit into? Where is the best fit for this in terms of explaining what it is? So you basically, you go through each one of these pieces here where you say, all right, what's the risk? What are the security standards that it references? And basically say why it is a risk, essentially. And you can qualify this using some of these down here. So for instance, I can say, well, my threat agent, perhaps I think, okay, this is going to be to an employee, the malicious insider, for instance. And as I pick each of these, it'll start filling in some of this information down on the bottom. So my threat category, for instance, abuse of privilege. The threat action, perhaps, is going to be escalation of privilege. The threat intent here, we're going to say it's malicious. And the asset type here could be, while I want to say it's customer data, I could add a custom asset type, and I could say protected health information, because we are talking about HIPAA/HITECH. So for right now, I'll just go ahead and say, well, let me put that in there and say it's PHI. So here, I don't have any organizations listed, but I can list the organization and just pop that in easily. What the risk dependencies are, same thing, and define what exactly is a risk dependency. What risk category is it for the enterprise? In this case, I'm going to say it's regulatory, because if they have a breach of some sort, for instance, and these controls aren't in place, the Office of Civil Rights will likely be interested in investigating and possibly assessing civil fines against them. And then, of course, the ongoing remediation work, which will take up a lot of time and is a significant opportunity cost to an organization. The business driver, if there's a custom business driver here, we can define these. And then what security categories here, where either it's one of these three, or what I often do is I put in one that just says all. In this case, we say, all right, it's going to be on the confidentiality, for instance. So this is what I start doing with this after I've defined what the risk is. Then I work on basically likelihood and impact statements. And I go through the same process, essentially, where I've summarized what the vulnerability is and what the current controls are, what their relative effectiveness is, and then the likelihood of occurrence. And I can start qualifying the likelihood of occurrence. I can sit there and just say, okay, which one is it? I think, is it likely? Let's see, let me move this over so you can see it a little bit more. Or actually zoom out slightly. There. So here, as I mouse over each one of these, say, all right, it's highly probable that it's going to occur. Let's see. Oh, my zoom is off a little bit, so you can't quite read the top. But essentially, each one of these is going to give me an indication of exactly what that means. So, for example, if it's highly probable, controls are not going to be effective to prevent successful exploitation. So what I can do is I can just monitor like this and say, all right, it's likely, it's highly probable, whatever it is for its score, what I think it is. Or I can work on these pieces down here where I can say, all right, we know we have something about the agent, what the threat agent is. Is it confirmed? Does it exist? Do we have solid evidence about what that is? Is it circumstantial where we think it's there, or it can happen only periodically? The threat occurrence, same thing, whether it's how often it happens. Is it a constant? Is it an everyday thing? Do you think it's only going to happen, say, a couple of times a year, basically? And so the frequency of occurrence, basically, for that. In the middle section here, we can talk about what the vulnerability is. And any one of these that I pick, basically, will change what my score is. So, for instance, if I can access whatever it is and I can do it remotely, basically, I'll say that. And see, if you notice, it just changed the score, basically, and said, okay, it's going to be highly probable. So as I use each one of these and think, all right, what's my authentication? Is it trivial? Do they not only need a username and a password or something? So each one of these will affect this, and I have the opportunity, if I want, to write comments down in the bottom here. Similarly, for the controls, are the controls ad hoc, where the control owner knows that there are issues and they need to do something, basically, but they don't really have anything going? This section on the controls is basically like a capability maturity model, upside down, if you will. So here, you couldn't touch it if you needed to, basically. It's not quite bomb-proof, but it's almost. Here, very immature process stack so far. Getting better, a bunch better than that, managed, optimized, etc. So you basically go through each one of these and you answer it to the best of what you can, essentially based on what you found out when you were on site. The impact is the same way, basically, where I summarize what the assets are. Here we're concerned about protected health information primarily. What's the exposure? Well, it's in SQL databases that don't use data at rest encryption of some sort. So I have, say, a web front end for some kind of system, even internal use, even if it's not public-facing, unprotected databases. So if there aren't other compensating controls that would mitigate against that lack of data at rest encryption, so look at what the impact is and decide how bad is it. Is it going to be something that breaks the bank if a breach happens? Is it something moderate where you can basically expect a limited disruption in what your service is, and essentially think of it like business continuity? How many days are you down if something bad happens? How quickly can you get back up and running? So I'll show you some of the ones that I've done. So here, for instance, let me get rid of this new risk. So here I can manage it. And also, if I have one that's very similar to something and I've already entered the data, I can clone it and basically just create a copy and then go in and edit so that it's new. So you don't have to always click new each time. I found it was efficient to be able to clone the ones that were similar and then just edit them and update them. This one you don't need, so let's get rid of him. So, for example, let's say, let's look at this one. Okay, here, for instance, at the beginning, we're talking about user access clearance, essentially. I haven't filled in information down here. And again, as I said, I started developing this demo template, but it isn't completely mature where I have, say, an answer in every field. But you can get the sense of where we'd go with this. So here, I've described what the business risk is. A malicious internal employee abuses privileges, gains unauthorized access to patient information. Risk may be greater to an employee having more privilege than they need, so no least privilege in effect here. And what the compliance risk is. There's the HIPAA section, so I've stated this, so it spells out exactly what the HIPAA Act requires for this, and then basically any evidence that's in here that I'm using to reference that. Or if I had attached any files, I could show them here too. So from this, my likelihood statement here and this one here, I would probably spend some time and do a little bit more wordsmithing and write it out to articulate what the likelihood is, that I think that this is a very likely thing. I have started working. Some of my information will show up down here for my control notes, basically. And you'll see them. They're over on the side here. So I can also work on this, and if I want something, if I look at it and I think, okay, I forget something, that I can get in here and I can edit and basically insert information on the fly. And one thing I want to do too is periodically what I'll do is I'll think, okay, I've made some changes, so I have to make sure I prompt myself and just go up and click Save. It's pretty straightforward. We're always building in features that make the Security Process Management Suite stronger and more robust. So at some point, if you don't save, it'll prompt you basically before you leave. But you want to make sure you save, essentially, and just a good thing. Who doesn't hate to lose work, basically? So what I do is I go through each one of those and fill them out and basically go through the process of describing what the risks are, how likely they are, and what I think is going to happen, basically. And again, while this is kind of a weak statement, the compromise of these leads to information disclosure. Write it out and explain exactly what you think is going to happen, why it's going to happen, and then how bad it's going to be. And so, for instance, in this impact statement here, I might include things like what the breach cost per record would be, or that if they have, say, a database that's compromised and it has 60,000 patient records in it, and the average record cost is, say, $200 a record perhaps, then basically you can see what the impact is going to be. And so I'd want to list that. Valuable information that'll come in later on, and I want to put in my report. So I take the time and I go through each one of these, and basically I've got all of them. You can see as I go down the page here, I've got the physical ones, all the technical ones, and anything else that I think is an absolute gap as far as the HIPAA controls and the high-tech ones. So all of them, basically the same process. You just go through them and you document as much as possible about it, and then qualify what the risks are, and also use the tool's ability to quantify them. So when this is done, what we get from this is a really pretty risk map. So if I go over here and look at the risk map, for instance, it's going to show me, right now I'm looking at it, I'm saying, okay, what's the impact over here on the y-axis, and on the x-axis, the likelihood. And it's just a numeric plot. So from these right now, it's going to say, accept, evaluate, or act. And basically that's the way we can think of the heat map. And each one of these I can mouse over and I can click and see which one is it, basically, which dot corresponds. So I've adjusted the map essentially so I can see these. If I want, I can also look at this as if it was, say, a status plot where we just know that they're all active. Whichever way you want to display it based upon what you're going to do with the map itself and what audiences you're going to present the information to. So here, let's go back and just put the risk plot on. So I can sit here and I can look at the information here in my risk editor. I can go back in and I can, again, update some of the information that was generated back in the Risk Builder tab. I can sit there and say, well, what's my highest? I can look at these and I can sort, basically. So I can say, all right, the top worries here are administrative, applications, and data criticality analysis, and then information system activity review, and then on down from here. So I've got my risks. I can see them in the heat map. This is the eye candy, if you will. It's nice. I can sit there, and if I want, I can also zoom in on it and basically look at things a little bit closer. This is kind of handy for presentation. Or if I wanted to, I could also apply filters. So I could say, well, show me the risks that are currently being mitigated, or the ones that are currently still active. So if I want to, I can filter for these and display the information selectively based on what my intentions are. So once I've done this and I've identified all the risks, the next step is basically think, okay, well, what are we going to do about these? So how about if we take the information and we decide to package it as projects and say, all right, so the goal is to remediate the risks, and let's figure out and say, okay, well, the things that are up here in the red, those are things that we're going to recommend up the line to perhaps, say, an executive operations committee, or if we're speaking directly to the board, or an IT steering committee, whatever the IT governance function is above me. What I want to be able to do is to say, these are the most serious risks, and these are the reasons why. And we have projects put in place here where we say, okay, what are we going to do about the risks? So we'll use the Project Builder tab to start defining what those are. So wherever you have a risk, basically you want to create a project for that. Whether or not it's funded this year, that's not known at this time, we'll basically put together our argument to management as to why these are important and the relative priority of each of them, and also demonstrate essentially what the bang for the buck is. Which ones should you do first for which reasons? So here, for instance, let's go application access review. So I can put notes in here. What I'm looking at is what category is it? I'm saying this one's compliance. I can add other categories if I want to, basically. Is it just an investment? Is it maintenance? Is it something that's operational, basically? Here, it's a compliance issue. So that's what I've done with these. All of these I've listed as compliance issues. And this is the part here where we can go through and we can say, well, is there a capital expense or is it just an operating expense, basically? Year 1, year 2, out to year 3, and we can essentially quantify what we think it's going to cost to take care of this risk. And one of the things, too, down here at the bottom, I'll say, all right, for this one here, application access review, which risks does it address? So of all these risks over here on the side that we've identified, is it something here, is it information system activity review, for instance? Does it affect that? And so basically I can keep updating what I think, which risks working on this as a project will affect. So from this, I go through this basically, and I can build in as much information as possible on it, and then I can see what it looks like as a project map. Again, another nice, kind of like a heat map basically, but in this case it's going to say, here's my business value along the y-axis, and then down here the cost, year 1 cost in this case. Should we consider it down here? Is it something we're going to recommend? And up here we think strongly that these should be implemented. So here, this will show me exactly what's going on for my projects, so I can present this in the report form, or I can take these and take them the graphics out of a report and say put them into a PowerPoint presentation, put them on an internal website, however I need to use the information. There's some other work down here that I think is also very valuable. This project value, where I can look at this business value model here and I can say, okay, so what is this? So here, if this is a high risk and it's currently got a score of an 82, what does it do as far as IT capability or additional value? So for instance here, application access review. If it's something that, for instance, it's required, IT has to have it, it will materially affect IT if it's not there, or whether IT is, say, just a part of it where they're happy with it and think that they'll receive some serious benefit from this happening, basically. So application access review, obviously you've got to look at who has access to your applications, why they have access. So do the right people have access, or do they have excessive access? I always want to focus on least privilege. And so I'll look at it and say, okay, these users, do they absolutely have to have access to these, or perhaps do you have excess access that has to be pruned, basically? Or, for instance, are there user accounts that are orphaned because perhaps the user is no longer with the organization and that account is still open and has access into sensitive systems? You want to always be doing application access review on a periodic basis just so that you can eliminate those. So here, the IT capability, IT supports it. They may realize some advantage from it, or if they advocate for it. So I can pick these and I can start basically changing what goes on here a little bit. How about additional value? The business units, some of them are going to advocate it, or they'll support it, or they'll be neutral. So you can essentially adjust what your score is here. I think in this case, the business units understand that they have compliance issues, so we'll say that they advocate for it. And so basically the value here, the highest is an 82, it's going to list it as an 81, but I can essentially tune it a little bit with this information. So from here, I'll go through and basically make sure each one of the risks is covered and that I have a project to address each one of those. And again, periodically saving just to make sure that I don't lose any data. I can also work on this budget tab right here and spend some time here where I can look basically at the project and the different risks and say, all right, if I want to change my cost figures in here, I can do this. I have a couple here that are unfunded right now where I don't have any cost information in, and so I can, there are multiple places in SPM where you can go back in and edit your data, basically. So here, if I look at this and think, okay, so if I want to fund something like background checks, we don't have anything in there, and basically take it, and so it's something that's up here listed as a funded project where there's something already in the budget for it. The unfunded projects may be things that are going to be something that we'll show for next year, basically. So we can use this and just keep track of them and manage what's doable at any given time, but also use the tool to be able to show the risks that still remain that haven't been treated in one sense or another. And with risks, you're always striving to mitigate them, or you accept them, or you just transfer the risk of some sort, basically, to somebody else. So from here, manage the budget, essentially. And then what I can do is I want to have my report, so I'll create a risk report. So here, that's that heat map that shows all of my risks again. And what I can do is I can select how I want the summary to be on the risk coverage, on the risk count by impact or category, these different categories over here on these radio buttons. So when I'm ready, what I can do is I can export this to a spreadsheet for possible input into some other system or import, or I'll create a Word document, basically. We're here. Click on the Report tab, or I'm sorry, Report button, and it comes in as a report.doc. So let's look at it quickly in Word. So here we get this a little bit of information up at the beginning on how to use this. It comes in quickly with report contents, and this is a very basic report. What I'll do here is this is where we do things that, put it into, say, the corporate framework. So, for instance, for a client, I'm going to have obviously a cover sheet on it. I'm going to have an executive summary, and so there are parts of here where I'll basically be taking this information and essentially editing it and just putting it into the report presentation format that I need. But each one of these, you can see where these are all the risks that are in there. And as I go on down, it will also show me the projects and then all the project details. And then here, if I want to put some information in, or take things out, like if I don't, these pieces here, if I don't have any filters involved, for instance, there's no reason that this is going to need to show up in the end version of the report. Here's my status map. So here, if I take each one of these things, one thing I can do is, because that's this little text box, I can sit there and I can change the font. I can do all the things that I need on this graphic right here to make it as legible as possible, basically, or to show or highlight things. If I want to bold certain ones, or just find another way to call them out, or take these little pieces and move the text around so that you basically want to make it so that the plot is as easy to understand as possible, particularly when you have risks that are very close to each other numerically, because then it can be a little hard. You can look at this and go, well, which one's workstation use, which is proactive privacy monitoring. So you do a little bit of manual moving around of the legends, basically, or the labels, so that you can get this to look as attractive to your viewer, basically, as possible. Then I've got a risk table down here where this is going to jump down to the section, the relative section. I can see what my score is. In this case, it's ranked. And then the risk details. And here, this is directly all the information that I wrote originally in the Risk Builder tab. And so what I'll do here, this is another opportunity to look at it and say, okay, what else do I want to say? And so if I didn't add something in back in Risk Builder when I was working that way, I'd come in here and I'd sit there and I'd essentially expand on it. So this is a final opportunity to basically take the information, now that it's in a report, and say, is this the last word on it? Is this the best way to say this, essentially? And so you always basically use it as an opportunity to make sure that you're making the best case for why this risk is what it is, what the likelihood is, and what the impacts are going to be, and then what your risk treatment plan is going to be. So each one of these goes down like this through the rest of the report, basically, and that's what the risk report looks like. And so basically I can do the same thing. I can look at the project tracker down here too, and I can see where these projects are, whether they're on target, what their status is, essentially. And this is a little bit like a Gantt chart in a sense, that we're using it for project management or process at this point. And essentially look at these details and say, all right, there's my status, where is it in here? Basically, what % complete, when's it starting? And so what I want to do is I have projects, is I'll use SPM and I'll keep going in and I'll adjust these. And so if it doesn't actually start, for instance, in this case, well, say back in September 12th, 2012, then basically just update the dates, essentially. So I want to keep working with my data to keep it as current as possible, so that if I'm using this, you want to think of SPM as this interactive tool that beyond generating reports, as say one time, here's what the report is at this quarter of the year, for instance. What I want to be able to do is keep the data up to date so that whenever I get in here, or if I have multiple users, or for instance, my manager comes in and wants to check on the status of where certain projects are. Internally, if I'm using this, because while I use this as a tool for compliance assessments for external clients, if I'm inside a company and I have access to the security process management suite, I want to come in here and I want to be looking at these things and thinking, how can I keep using this information to articulate why we need to do what we need to do? And so I'm going to use this and keep this information as up to date as possible so that I can keep management and my IT governance functions as basically they know exactly what's happening and why. And the same thing for the risk tracker, basically. So that shows our projects here, basically the ones that are currently, well, a lot of them are active. Some of them have been mitigated, basically, and the arrows basically show my direction for how things have gone a little bit. And again, what's happened. So before, what my score is after something's been mitigated, what the trend is. So that's what the arrows are showing. So in a nutshell, that's essentially what the Security Process Management Suite is, as far as me using first the Compliance Communicator module to essentially collect and collate all my information on what the controls, weaknesses are, where the gaps are. And again, my intention was to collect all that information in Compliance Communicator, identify which controls weren't in place all the way, or which ones were, say, only partially in place, where I would still say, well, that's still a risk. And so while I used it to select the ones that were all the fails, remember I didn't have a button that said partial. So I look at it, and so for me, if it's something that was a partial, I'm going to have to list it as a fail just so that I can make sure that I get that into Risk Communicator. And then what I'll do in the report, I'll qualify why it's a partial, for instance. So I'll say, well, of the 6 applications that they have that have protected health information, 5 of them, the controls are perfect on it, but this is the weak one, and this is where it needs improvement, basically. Perhaps the password strength isn't as complex as it needs to be. Perhaps password expiration isn't in force, or there's no password history remembered, basically. Or maybe there's no account timeout value, say at 15 minutes of inactivity. Whatever it is, whatever the weakness is. So I'll call that out separately. So, and then, of course, when I'm in Risk Builder here, I'll basically put in all the information possible. And again, when I'm back in the report mode, I'll go back through that and I'll say, is that everything that I need to say about it? Let's see. Think about what else to tell you. Well, I've had an opportunity to use this tool a few times. I would not yet call myself an absolute expert in it. There are things that I learn about it every day. And so, for instance, here, if I'm looking at this, and I thought, all right, well, what's the reset button? What does that do? So, for example, I hadn't used it before. So the reset button resets all the after scores to be equal to the before scores, basically. So here, go back to the help section and go, okay. So I can spend a bunch of time understanding exactly why the tool works the way it does. We have some folks at Caliber who are absolutely excellent with this. And so what I do is I spend time and I basically say, hey, why does it work this way, essentially? And I'm always amazed at how complex the tool is behind the scenes, or behind the curtains or under the covers, basically. So I appreciate the tool because it's an extremely powerful tool for basically helping me as the assessor collect all my information and analyze it and effectively find a way to present that. So that is basically how I used the tool to conduct the HIPAA HITECH IT risk assessment for a fairly large healthcare provider in the Seattle area this summer.